BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. And hello, everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. In this episode, I will be responding to your comments from last week's episode about the Zodiac killer suspect L.D. Hill, examining a possible Zodiac communication called the Scorpion Ciphers, which I haven't devoted a segment to on Black Box Online Radio before, and some more serial killer true crime talk radio. First, I would like to just share a couple announcements and pieces of news. The first is that there is a new interview with Mike Rodelli and Holly Toschi over on Planet X Filmworks, which is hosted by Ross Geraci. Mike Rodelli is, of course, the author of In the Shadow of Mount Diablo, and his Zodiac killer suspect is named Shel Cavale, and Holly Toschi is the cousin of Dave Toschi, the famed detective who worked on the Zodiac case. And more or less, I think it's fair to say that Holly Toschi has agreed with a lot of Mike Rodelli's points and research, and now has accepted that Shel Cavale was the Zodiac killer. And I invite you guys to listen to that. And I also want to let you know that there are some new updates on ZodiacKillerX.com. ZodiacKillerX.com is run by Angela Blevins, and she has a suspect named Mike Klein, whom I've discussed on a recent Zodiac Killer news report, but you can check out her website, see everything that she has to say, and you can make your own determinations. And the final update is that the first installment of the novel White Horse Strong is now available here on YouTube. I've been writing the books The White Horse Killer Saga, starting with Killer on a White Horse. The second story is called The Barry Albert Tapes, and the third one has been released as a YouTube exclusive here, and it is called White Horse Strong, and it came out on Saturday. And out of all the audiobook recordings that I've done over the last 6 months, I think that that one was the best. Maybe it's just because I'd been looking to talking to you guys about White Horse Strong for a while, but nonetheless, I invite you to check out the playlist for Killer on a White Horse. It also has the additional stories all put together. You can get it all in one playlist here on BBOR, and as of course you can like and subscribe, go through some links in the description box. One of them is for BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. But I want to revisit the Zodiac killer suspect L.D. Hill because I had two guests on the program for last week's Zodiac Monday, and their names are Jeff Thornton and Melissa Rose Tappa. They're a husband and wife research team, and their Zodiac suspect is named L.D. Hill. His full name was Loring Dale Hill, and they shared their observations, and I was really quite surprised that a lot of people in the comments section were not thinking very highly of their suspect, or at the very least, they dismissed him outright. They simply said that these people were wrong, and they didn't want to give Loring Dale Hill a fair chance as a Zodiac suspect. And on a show like Zodiac Monday, I want almost everyone to have a fair opportunity to present their findings. And I think that the only disqualifications would be if I think the person is being dishonest, not being genuine, if someone is being fraudulent, or at the very least, if somebody has material that I can't quite understand because it's too incoherent, and I've talked to you guys about a lot of these reasons before, but I think that Jeff and Melissa have raised a lot of solid points, and I was really quite surprised that a lot of people were just flat out saying that their observations were completely wrong. For example, let's talk about some of the strong points that have been shared about L.D. Hill, and I was also surprised because I've had Melissa on as a guest before and people didn't respond that way, and I've also talked about L.D. Hill in a previous Zodiac Killer news report, and that also didn't have the same type of response. So as I said, let's go through some of the points. They began investigating their suspect Loring Dale Hill, and not only trying to find supporting points, but also looking for something that could debunk him. Is there anything that would eliminate him, rule him out? Because the Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And they began investigating this person of interest named L.D. Hill, and he was a career naval officer. He spent the early part of his career in the Navy as a helicopter pilot, and then he went on to become a naval aviation mechanic. And this can be somewhat important because we see a lot of things in the Zodiac Killer's letters and codes and just the entire creation of the Zodiac persona that could hint that he was either in the Navy or had some type of experience with navigation or some type of nautical training, so to speak. And some of the observations have been made by an individual such as Gareth Penn, who wrote the book Time 17, and he talks all about how the Zodiac even went so far as to write a letter where he used the word radians in his acted vocabulary, and that's a word that most people wouldn't be using regularly when they're trying to talk about something like the location of the bomb, saying it concerns radians and inches along the radians. And Gareth Penn was just immediately thinking, okay, this guy has to have some type of advanced education in mathematics, or maybe he's an architect. And I have to give a shout out to one of you guys in the comments section named Jamie Hendrickson, who said that, well, now wait a second, it's not only mathematicians and architects that are going to be using radians, pilots and sailors also use radians. And Loring Dale Hill was both a pilot and a sailor. As I said, he was a helicopter pilot in the Navy, went on to be a naval aviation mechanic, but that's just very basic. You might be thinking, well, yeah, lots of guys were in the Navy, not all of them were the Zodiac killer. What I think that Melissa and Jeff have created in terms of evidence that is the strongest would be their timeline that they have for Loringdale Hill's whereabouts in conjunction with the Zodiac killer crimes. The first Zodiac crime took place on December 20th of 1968 with the Lake Herman Road murders. Approximately 2.5 weeks after that, Loringdale Hill leaves the Bay Area, and yes, he was stationed in the Bay Area in Alameda, California, and this is all documented in military records. Then he got on the aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise, and he was deployed from January 7th of 1969 to July 2nd of 1969. So that's when he returns back to California, July 2nd of 1969, 2 days before the Zodiac Killer's second crime, the Blue Rock Spring shooting, which saw the death of Darlene Ferrin. And then the Zodiac Killer goes on to make a phone call that night, mailing a three-part cipher and 3 copies of a letter at the end of July 1969, and then there's another letter that's mailed in the early part of August, received on August 4th. And then the Zodiac Killer does not commit a murder in the month of August. Now that seems kind of weird because the Zodiac is going to, more or less, create this persona and not commit another murder until September 27th of 1969. Again, this is all documented that Loring Dale Hill left the Bay Area on August 8th of 1969 and returned to his home state of Ohio. He was from Ohio, but he lived in Alameda, California during the time of the Zodiac murders. He returns to Ohio with his family, and then he's even involved in some type of altercation where he brings his children to the house in Ohio, and for some reason he was forced away from them. 2 other family members held up shotguns and told him that he couldn't take the kids back to California. And then on September 27th of 1969, we see the Zodiac Killer committing the Lake Berryessa stabbing in the costume with the clip-on sunglasses and the black hood, and committing the crimes by knife. Then a message was written on the car door that had the Zodiac Killer symbol, the word Vallejo, the dates of Zodiac activity, and the words by knife. Now, one part of the interview that we had last week with Jeff and Melissa is where they said that they thought that that might have been the conclusion of the Zodiac persona, because in the Naval Air Corps, 5 kills would be called an ace. And I've thought about this too. I've even talked about this on some previous Zodiac Mondays when I was just examining it from the fact that the Zodiac Killer wrote a message on the car door and signed it by knife. It has the Zodiac symbol. Was that meant to be a send-off? And I can use that as a Zodiac Killer challenge question for you. Do you believe that the final Zodiac murder was meant to take place on September 27th of 1969? As we said, he had a plan to murder 5 people, but things didn't go according to plan. Number 1, David Verity and Betty Lou Jensen were both murdered at Lake Herman Road. Number 2, Darlene Ferrin was murdered at Blue Rock Springs, but Mike Michaud was the other person there, and he survived. Number 3, Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell were attacked at Lake Berryessa, and the person who attacked them most likely thought that they were dead. I absolutely don't believe any of the theories where they think that the Zodiac murdered or attempted to murder them, but only to I guess I should have said the Zodiac attacked them, but didn't actually want to kill them. It was just meant to stab them with the knife so then they could tell the story of the costume and the attack and all of that. I don't believe any of those things. I think that the Zodiac thought they were dead, and that's why he wrote the dates of activity on the corridor. Now, one of the victims died, Cecilia Shepard, but Brian Hartnell would go on to survive. And then we have the Stein murder on October 11th of 1969. And this is perhaps, again, someone is just trying to murder 5 people within a 12-month cycle. Could this be tied into something like trying to make an ace? Well, that your guess is as good as mine. I mean, that requires a little bit of speculation, but I think what's much more important in that discussion is, do you believe that the Zodiac Killer was trying to conclude his murderous crime spree with the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and then the Stein murder was done for a different reason? On a personal level, I've also entertained the possibility in the past that the Zodiac Killer was using Jack the Ripper as a playbook. Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper called Ripper Wednesday, of course, and after the third night of Ripper activity, which is actually the fourth murder, the Ripper either wrote a message on a wall, or let's just say a message on a wall was found called the Goulston Street Graffito. And then after the third night of Zodiac activity, the third day of Zodiac activity, there's a message that is written on the car door. And I thought, well, did the Zodiac write the message on the car door simply because he wasn't able to find a wall nearby or something like that? But that's all beside the point. I just wanted to go through the strong points that are in favor of L.D. Hill being the Zodiac Killer. Number one, he does match a lot of the physical descriptions. He was 6 feet tall. Again, this is found in his military records. I've read them for myself. And he matches some of the facial similarities to the composite sketch. He absolutely would have had the brain to have been the Zodiac Killer. And here's a point. Here's a reason why I was so surprised that so many people think poorly of L.D. Hill as a Zodiac suspect, because when you had a show like the History Channel's The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer with Sal and Ken, and they're talking about the Zodiac suspects, Lawrence Kane and Ross Sullivan, and everybody's like, well, I guess Lawrence Kane could have learned coding in the Navy. Well, I guess Lawrence Kane would have had the brain to have been the Zodiac because he was in the Navy. I mean, well, what would you say about a suspect like L.D. Hill, who has all of those other boxes checked, plus that he is dealing with some type of violent history to the point where his family thought that he was so dangerous that he couldn't have the kids, or at the very least, I think he needs to be kept away from the kids. Now, this ties into the next part, because somebody has brought this up when I talk about different types of suspects, and they say, wait a second, do these suspects actually have a history of violence, or are people just accusing a random so-and-so of being the Zodiac when they may have just had some type of similar interest compared to what's in the letters, or maybe they had some similar occupations, like being a naval mechanic or a pilot? And yes, L.D. Hill did have a history of violence, but this is a little bit harder to document because there's a story that he committed a murder in 1957, and that he murdered a taxi driver in Texas. And this is, again, just something that has been passed around from family member to family member, and a lot of the details of the story are unclear. However, it appears that the taxi driver was helping L.D. Hill's wife move her things out of the place where they were staying, and that L.D. Hill interrupted the move and murdered the taxi driver, and that the murder was covered up. I have tried to find more info on this about a murder that took place in 1957, the murder of a taxi driver in that part of Texas. I haven't been able to find anything, and even Jeff and Melissa openly admit that they've also looked for things, and they've been unable to find a lot of supporting newspaper articles or info. But you would think that if someone is actually going to experience this, like his wife witnessed this event, and you would think that she would be able to recall that someone had been murdered, and that wouldn't be something that she just got confused about. Even the year that it took place in 1957, well, no, it was actually in 1956 or 1958. You would think that people would be able to recall that. I mean, because you don't experience those type of events regularly to the point where you should be that confused, but anything is possible. I mean, some people do get their memories mixed up and so on, but you would think with something of that magnitude that it would ring clear as a bell for decades after it happened, but that's just my take on the subject. Then I think in the final recap, I just want to say that I have found that the strong points for LD Hill are the timeline, that he had the brain for this. He would have understood all of the elements of the Zodiac's letters, codes, cryptograms, and he is just somebody who also can be placed in the Bay Area on specific dates of Zodiac activity, and when there are these large gaps in Zodiac activity, he's out. He's gone for 6 months on the USS Enterprise, returns 2 days before the Blue Rock Springs shooting. He's gone for 3 weeks in the month of August, and there are no Zodiac murders in the month of August 1969, returns before the Lake Berryessa stabbing in September. So all of this stuff is just matching up, and I don't think that it should be downplayed, and I definitely wouldn't dismiss all of Jeff and Melissa's findings, and I want to hear more. And you can find out more about their Zodiac Killer suspect, LD Hill, at ZodiacKillerbomb.com. That's the website they are running, and the Facebook group, The Zodiac Killer and Me. But right now, I would like to move on to the next segment here on Zodiac Monday, and I will be talking about the Scorpion ciphers. Not only did Jeff and Melissa bring up a lot of points about the Scorpion ciphers in our most recent interview, but I would also like to give a shout out to Sam Fisher, who is the author of The Zodiac Killer Identity, and his Zodiac suspect is named Joseph Paul Franklin, and he more or less made a request to have a deeper look into the Scorpion ciphers, and for me, this is going to be the first official look that I've done for Black Box Online Radio. Definitely the first time that I've talked about them on the air during a solo recording. And to help us out, we're going to go over to CipherMysteries.com. And it's been a very long time since I've used this website, not since I did the episode on the Rubin cipher for one of the Anything Goes Friday segments, and I invite you guys to check that out. Scorpion ciphers. From 1991 onwards, John Walsh, the well-known host of America's Most Wanted, received a string of letters and cryptograms signed Scorpion. These are more usually known as the Scorpion ciphers. However, only 2 of the cipher texts and a few pages of text have been made available to the public. And I'm going to get to the point with this one. They are called the S1 and the S5. Those are the ones that have been made available. The S1, of course, would be the first Scorpion cipher, and the S5 is perhaps the more famous one. If you were to do a Google search of the Scorpion ciphers, you would perhaps see the S5 come up to the top, and it's the one that says, "Hi, remember me?" The 5th cipher is known as the S5 and is laid out on a 12 by 15 grid. 155 of its 180 symbols are unique. The 1st cipher, the Scorpion cipher S1, is laid out on a 10 by 7 grid. 53 of its 70 symbols are unique. So, that immediately is pushing me away from thinking that this is some type of Zodiac-related connection, or at the very least, this is most likely not a simple substitution cipher. I mean, we have 26 letters in the English alphabet. 155 of the 180 symbols are unique. Yeah, that sounds like some type of different substitution is going on. But the Zodiac Killer did indeed use different types of methods. We can see this very clearly from the 408 cipher, which was solved in 1969, and the 340 cipher, which was solved only a couple years ago. Now, does the name Scorpion stand out to you? It should, because there was a serial killer that was used in the Dirty Harry movies that was based on the Zodiac Killer, but he wasn't called the Zodiac, right? What was he called? Scorpio. No matter what, it appears that there are certain similarities that have been used between the Zodiac Killer ciphers and these Scorpion ciphers. Now, I don't know if the person who was creating them took the name Scorpion and was thinking of Scorpio from the Dirty Harry movies, but they definitely do appear to be similar, and some people believe, and this is one of the things that some individuals just want to take to the bank, and that is that the Zodiac Killer used what are called booze balls for the ciphers, that they were used by a company called Booz Allen Hamilton, and these are some very similar things to what the Zodiac it was using. For example, you have the circles that are half filled, the circles that are filled only a quarter of the way, and then you have letters from the English language, and some letters, like the letter F, have been reversed. a lot of very similar symbols are used here. But you guys also might be noticing that these ciphers appear to be very sloppy, and I remember from Robert Graysmith's book, Zodiac from 1986, he openly called the Zodiac ciphers a work of art, and there's something that is reasonably artistic about the Scorpion ciphers, but I don't know if I'd call them a work of art. It almost looks like something that a high schooler would have come up with when he was just sitting in class and doodling, and he happened to be somewhat of a good sketch artist, or just someone who was good with a pen rather than a sketch artist. But that's just my take on the subject, and I will just ask you guys that as a challenge question. What do you see when you look at the Scorpion ciphers? Do you see more similarities or more differences? Overall, I think there are more differences. For starters, there are lots of things that the Zodiac Killer wouldn't have necessarily used, like perhaps a backwards copyright sign, and also lots of dice that are used here. It appears that this person is intentionally using the pairs of dice. I wonder how they would have spelled that. So I think that it's about halfway in, halfway out. But not only do we have the Scorpio thing, not only do we have the booze balls, not only do we have some similar symbols in the reverse letters, what else do we have here? We have the Zodiac Killer being a horribly inconsistent serial killer. We have the Zodiac Killer being someone who is constantly trying to change up his whole MO and his whole type of his persona so he doesn't get caught. Is this something that he would have done later on? And not to mention, these were sent to John Walsh of America's Most Wanted. And I mean, that's how I learned about the Zodiac Killer. And a lot of people have also said the exact same thing, that they learned about the Zodiac on America's Most Wanted, and even before the Zodiac film came out. And Robert Graysmith's books, of course, did a lot too. But that was just the first time that I ever heard the name the Zodiac. And in addition to getting your feedback, I also wanted to share something with you guys, because I said that Sam Fisher was one of the people who requested a discussion on the Scorpion ciphers, and he has written something out here which he sent to the email address, BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. Anybody can write the show there. And Sam writes, "Hi Ned, still enjoying your Zodiac Monday. Keep up the good work. I wanted to let you know what I thought about the Scorpion ciphers, as I have made some unique observations. If you notice on the 70-character Scorpion cipher, if you count the backwards L's, they appear 4 times, as opposed to any other letter or symbol. Generally speaking, the Scorpion ciphers are not considered Zodiac, but I think we need to take another look at them. Also, there are observations about the 180-character cipher, if you are interested in them. Basically, I think since the cracking of the Z340, we need to take yet another look at the Scorpion ciphers. In the 180-character Scorpion cipher, what I noticed is that the backwards L symbol is located right next to the Zodiac-looking symbol in what is almost the center of the 180-character cipher. These symbols, if no one has noticed, appear right above what looks like a pair of dice, strangely. That's that pair of dice I was talking about. Another observation is that R and H are underlined at the top of the 180-character cipher, in which case this indicates what I have suspected, that R and H convert to the numbers 18 and 8. Keep up the good work. And 18 and 8 are very important because Sam Fisher's suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery is Joseph Paul Franklin, who was a real serial killer called the Racist Killer. And Sam has talked about this on a previous Zodiac Monday episode, in a segment that he wrote out, a piece that he wrote out for a segment on Zodiac Monday, I should say. And it was all about how he believed that the Zodiac Killer had a type of OCD called arithmomania. His suspect, Joseph Paul Franklin, had arithmomania, and no matter what, no matter who your suspect is, Sam has made some interesting observations about how he believes that the Zodiac Killer was fixated on the number 8, and that, of course, would also appear in 18, 88, any number that would also feature the number 8, and Sam has made lots of observations, and I've also had the opportunity to interview Sam Fisher for a couple episodes here on BBOR, which I invite you to listen to. I have one final line from him here that says, when he talks about the Scorpion ciphers, we need to be familiar with a video that has a pattern on the Z340 with backwards L's and J's. The patterns appear that they have yet to explain. If you notice on the 70-character Scorpion cipher, you count the L's, they appear 4 times as opposed to any other symbol. Can I just ask you guys, do you think that it's going to be possible to solve these ciphers? Because when the Scorpion ciphers have such few repeating characters, I mean, is it humanly possible? Now, I've interviewed Chad Burke as well, and he has made the claim, well, it's not his original claim, but it's something that he believes, that any code created by man can be cracked by man. I think he got it from Edgar Allan Poe. But with such few repeating characters, what exactly would we make of this? Because, let's say hypothetically, even if somebody were to get the correct solution, how on earth would you be able to verify it? Because the symbols don't repeat that much. The amount of possibilities would be almost impossible to determine without the key. And it's not simply that I'm saying that, because when we look at the Zodiac killer ciphers, the Z13 and the Z32, they're extremely difficult to solve. The Z32 cipher created by the Zodiac only has 3 symbols that repeat. And some people are just saying, that's the honest answer. You're not going to get it without the key. The amount of possibilities is astronomical. And I mean, part of me is still hopeful that it can be done. But what do you guys think? And because I was just talking about Sam Fisher's suspect, Joseph Paul Franklin, I had the opportunity to watch a movie over the weekend called The People vs. Larry Flynt. It has Woody Harrelson playing Larry Flynt from Hustler magazine, and I first learned about this movie in 97 or 98 thereabouts. Remember back in the days of video rental stores? I mean, if there are any kids listening to this program, I don't know why they'd listen to Zodiac Monday, but if there are any kids or teenagers listening to this program, you'll probably have no idea what I'm talking about. The days of Blockbuster and Video Warehouse. Well, I would walk in there, and for about 2 years, there was this copy of The People versus Larry Flynt, and it would be the first thing that you would see when you would walk in. And I guess it was just because the case for that one had very large type and a very bold font, and it stood out. And I just remember looking at it over and over again because I was like 9 years old. I had no idea who Larry Flynt was, and even when I read the back, it made no sense to me about the story because I didn't know what Hustler magazine was. When I was like 7 or 8 or 9, I probably didn't even know what a hustler was or the definition of that word in the English language. But yes, the movie, The People versus Larry Flynt, is about, well, just that, everything I've said. But it does feature the serial killer Joseph Paul Franklin very briefly, because one of the more bizarre crimes that has been attributed to the Zodiac Killer by Sam Fisher is the attempted assassination of Larry Flynt. The attempted murder of Larry Flynt, perhaps, is a better way of putting it. And Larry Flynt, of course, was the publisher of Hustler magazine, and he was shot by a sniper, more or less. Joseph Paul Franklin killed his victims from a distance primarily, but sometimes he did get confrontational with them. And I'm just sharing a few observations about that part of the movie because they paid absolutely no attention to who the killer was, and they depicted him as somewhat of an old, decrepit man who might have even been borderline homeless or something like that. But the age would be completely off because Joseph Paul Franklin was only in his late 20s at the time. I looked it up and I think he was 27, just 1 month shy of his 28th birthday at the time of the attempted murder of Larry Flynt. Joseph Paul Franklin, as previously stated, was called the racist killer, and he had this type of hatred toward people who were not only of different races, but also people whom he believed to be race traitors, and that was why he targeted Larry Flynt of Hustler magazine, because he featured African Americans in Hustler. That is my understanding of it. I could be wrong or I could be misinterpreting it, but I think that that is a way to encapsulate the reason why Joseph Paul Franklin chose to target Larry Flynt. But there's just absolutely no context provided in the movie. Would like to get to your shoutouts from BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88. Once again, if anybody makes a donation or contribution to help the show, they will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. The first one comes to us from Batman66. Thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And Batman66 has been helping out a lot with the YouTube Shorts. Every day on this channel, well, almost every day, I release shorts talking about true crime cases, and a lot of them are focused on serial killers, and they are also released on Instagram and Facebook, BlackBoxNet88 over on Instagram, and just on my personal Facebook page, Ned DeHaan, and Batman66 has found a lot of good information that gets turned into the short episodes, and there are many more to come for the future. And the next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. Thank you so much again for your regular and consistent support. You two guys have really helped out the channel a lot. And next we have one from John H. over on BuyMeACoffee.com. And he just says, keep up the good work. Hey, John, thank you for everything that you have shared for the channel as well. I do appreciate all of that. And lastly, we have a shout out from Dennis G. And this was not from BuyMeACoffee.com or the super thanks on YouTube, but Dennis G has been sending in a lot of images for the program that get used in the slideshow here on Zodiac Monday, as well as on Ripper Wednesday. And I have another very brief announcement that I'd like to talk to you guys about. For a very long time on this channel, I've had something called the Anything Goes Friday segment, and on a recent episode of BBOR, I said that I'm planning a multi-part series on DB Cooper that will come out in the near future on Fridays. You can think of it as a Cooper Friday, if you will. Now, I don't know if it's going to be 100% permanent, but I've only talked about a handful of the DB Cooper suspects out there. And in terms of unsolved mysteries, out of all of the ones that I've already talked to you about in this episode, I mean, the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and DB Cooper, I think that the DB Cooper case has the highest chance of being solved, especially within the next 2 years or 3 years. Now, I might be forced to eat my hat, so to speak, about something like that. However, I think that it has a high chance, so maybe by the time this Cooper Friday thing gets started, I'm going to have to say, all right, well, the case has been closed, but that's the intention, that's the ambition. And there are plenty of other stories to talk about. So one more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions. And I said at the beginning that I was going to use this episode as an opportunity to talk to you guys about some serial killer talk radio. And that was a segment that I first did back in 2019, where I wanted to talk about many different subjects within a single episode. And because this is Zodiac Monday, I want to try and show how there could be some connections or some types of psychological similarities, all of that stuff. And the first one that I would like to talk about is one that was requested by a couple of you guys over the past 2 years, and that was the Weepy Voice killer, an individual named Paul Michael Stefani, who was from Minnesota, and he murdered 3 people and he attempted 2 other murders. But I was watching a documentary about him on Filmrise True Crime, and there were a lot of similarities to the Zodiac Killer, because the Zodiac Killer wasn't only a serial killer, he was also someone who bragged about the crimes. He made taunting phone calls, he wrote in the letters and the ciphers that we've been talking about. And with the Weepy Voice killer, his name was Paul Michael Stefani, and he would also call in to report his crimes. But he gets the name the Weepy Voice killer because he would talk in a very unusual voice, and he would say, I just killed a woman with an ice pick. And at first they couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman talking. And there was a criminologist that was featured in this Filmrise documentary named Dr. Rachel Yardley. And she said that her assessment of the Weepy Voice killer was, number 1, he wanted to brag about the crimes. The reason why he's making these phone calls isn't to actually express any type of genuine sympathy or actually express any type of genuine sorrow. He's trying to brag about the crimes. He's taunting the authorities. He's taking credit for them. But also, he doesn't actually want to get caught. It's all part of the game. So instantly, I thought about the Zodiac Killer. For a while, I was thinking about just doing a YouTube short about that one. However, I just thought, that's the Zodiac. Oh my goodness, that's the Zodiac. Like, the Zodiac Killer wants to brag about the crimes, he wants to take credit for them, he wants the authorities to know that he committed them, but he doesn't want to get caught. Now, in terms of comparisons and contrasting, a big difference between the Zodiac Killer and the Weepy Voice killer is the Zodiac is trying to make himself look tough. The Zodiac is trying to make himself look strong, and the Zodiac is definitely not trying to talk in some type of weepy, sad voice. I mean, the voice that I did is like a type of mimicking one, is actually fairly close, I think, to the way that the authorities would have heard the phone call and the way that they were recorded or just the way that the dispatchers would have heard them, because, again, high-pitched, crying, they can't tell if it's a man or a woman. And I also think that there's a twofold aspect of that for the Weepy Voice killer. When I was watching the Film Rise documentary, I was just thinking, is there any chance that this person actually wanted to fool people into thinking that he was a woman? It's possible. It's possible. But the Zodiac, for the most part, he starts out as trying to present himself as someone who is extremely dangerous. That's what he is all about in the summer and fall of 1969. He's saying that he committed these murders, he's the one who did it. Then he starts sending in the letters and the ciphers saying, you have to print these in the paper or I'm going on a kill rampage. Then he's saying stuff like he's going to attack school buses. He's trying to terrify people, not to create this false image of sorrow. However, the Zodiac would have somewhat of a reversal in the winter of 1969, and I say that because December 20th of 1969, the Zodiac mails the Melvin Belli letter, and that letter is all about how there's this thing inside me that I cannot control. And from that point onward, we see a lot of things about how the Zodiac is expressing a lot of emotions. He's saying, if I get lonely, I'll do my thing. If I get lonely, I'll do my thing, which you know I'm capable of. Or he's saying that if you don't give him attention, he's going to murder people. All of these emotions are coming out in the Zodiac letters. And I've simply said that I've identified 3 different voices within the realm of the Zodiac killer's persona. And I think that that is, could be just different sides of the personality. But what a lot of people have brought to my attention is that the Zodiac might have been trying to build some type of insanity defense if he ever were caught. And Michael Cole has even written about this in the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. And some of you guys in the comments section have either agreed with that or you've come to the conclusion on your own that he's trying to make himself look crazy at that point. But the Zodiac was definitely mentally ill, and he was a sociopathic or psychopathic serial killer. I mean, there's definitely some type of mental issue going on with him. But specifically, he might have been trying to craft an insanity defense. Now, as far as the Weepy Voice killer goes, he doesn't seem to mind presenting himself as a type of weakling, but at the same time, he's still trying to put it on as a facade. It's all about fooling the authorities. It's all about the manipulation, and it's all about just creating something that isn't real, and only he knows the truth. But as I said, the Weepy Voice killer was Paul Michael Stefani. He was ultimately caught and apprehended. Now, when I did the episode with Jeff and Melissa last week, some people were talking about how they didn't quite comprehend how the Zodiac could have had a partner, because this is some stuff that Jeff and Melissa have alluded to in the last interview. Or perhaps they said something to the effect of, well, they think that there was another participant that was involved. Some people are just saying, hey, you lost me once they tried to introduce another participant. And I was just thinking, well, a lot of people have multiple killers in their Zodiac theories, and some people even think of it as a male and female partnership, like a husband and wife partnership. Look at the theory involving Dawn and Betty Harden. There are 2 participants in that theory, a man and a woman, and that's not a theory that I endorse or anything, but a lot of people have signed on to it, and they send in comments to BBOR from time to time. And I just want to point out that theories like that are not impossible, no matter whom your Zodiac suspect is. Even if you're looking at a more complex theory like Ray Grant's conceptual art theory that has 4 participants, 1 is male and 3 are female, sometimes things like that do happen. As far as a female serial killer being the mastermind and organizing, murders, one episode that I did for the YouTube Shorts page was the story of Belle Gunness, who was referred to as Hell's Belle, sometimes even Hell's Angel. But Belle Gunness was a serial killer who would have a male participant lure men to a property, and it was all a setup, and it was all just about murdering them and taking their stuff. And it's a very clear example of how a woman orchestrated all of this and set it up and put it into motion. And there are lots of female serial killers out there. But here's something else that we have to be aware of. Serial killers are frequently male. Serial killers are male more often than not, but it's not completely uncommon for there to be female participants in a serial killer mystery. But even going beyond gender, why not look at just other serial killer partnerships? Because as soon as people say that it's not likely for there to be a serial killer duo or something like that, or a serial killer trio, everybody brings up Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, the Boneyard Killers, because there were two serial killers and they had a female participant, Leonard Lake's lover, Cricket. They're all about luring women to places and even just confining them, making snuff films, and you very clearly had sadistic serial killers that were working in tandem. Now, somebody brought up the DC Snipers in a recent episode, like saying, well, the DC Snipers were also a serial killer team, and that's a very good example because at first, the authorities thought that there was one person, and then it turned out that there were two. Because everybody looks at the Zodiac killer mystery and they see, well, there's only evidence of one person. Well, sometimes it can turn out to be two people. But you can also explore this question if you want. The DC Snipers were John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, and do you actually believe that that would meet the definition of being a serial killer? They created like the 23 Days of Terror in the DC area. I did a short recently where I was discussing the movie Blue Caprice with Isaiah Washington, and that movie is more or less, well, just stating that, yes, the DC Snipers were serial killers, and the reason why I said it that way is I did one episode about the DC Snipers before, and I watched the movie DC Sniper from 2010, and that was all about the crimes and the aftermath of the crimes. Blue Caprice was made in 2013, and that is all about the events leading up to the murderous crime spree committed by the snipers. And yes, they did commit additional snipers before they became spree killers. Did I say additional snipers? I meant additional murders. So yes, I think the DC Snipers were indeed serial killers. The first murder was in Tacoma, Washington, and they committed them all across the country leading up to DC, and ultimately that led to the crime spree that they are most famous for. And one thing that has been discussed with the DC Snipers is that there was only one murderer, Lee Boyd Malvo, and he confessed to all of the murders. He would later retract that confession, saying that he simply did that to protect John Allen Muhammad because he was more or less brainwashed by him. But that would be another example of how they think that there is one killer and it turns out to be two. Can you think of any other examples when people would think that there is one serial killer operating and it turns out to be a duo or a partnership? How about the Hillside Stranglers? And they are still even referred to as the Hillside Strangler, sometimes singular, when in reality, I think that there is just there's evidence of one person, but it turned out to be two people, Ken Bianchi and Angelo Buono, and that is not extremely shocking. But let's look at what all of these people have in common, whether it's the Hillside Stranglers, the DC Snipers, the Boneyard Killers, the Zodiac Killer, and even the Weepy Voice Killer and Hell's Bell. What do they want? Power, dominance, sometimes profit, sometimes they might want monetary value, but they want power and dominance. And somebody wrote out a very interesting comment for BBOR when they said that their observation about the Zodiac is, it's not an accident that Brian Hartnell and Mike Michaud survived the wrath of the Zodiac Killer. It's not an accident that Darlene Ferrin and Cecilia Shepard were murdered and the male victims survived, because the Zodiac had a very clear plan of operation. What the Zodiac Killer was trying to do was, he was trying to act like an alpha male and humiliate a beta male in front of his female partner, and that would have all been in his mind. It doesn't have anything to do with actual sociosexual hierarchies and any personality assessments of Brian Hartnell or Mike Michaud or David Faraday. This would be a fantasy that somebody has. He wants to portray himself as an alpha who's going to murder the woman and humiliate the man. And, that would make sense to me. That would really stand out to me as something like, wow, that's an extremely solid observation, except for one issue. And that's the Stein murder, the murder of Paul Stein, October 11th, 1969. Paul Stein is a lone male who's targeted. There's no female present. And what exactly would that mean? Is that another case of an alpha trying to dominate another man? I guess, but I mean, they could be. However, Paul Stein was mostly blindsided and defenseless and didn't have an opportunity to fight back or anything. And no, that definitely doesn't tie into this whole concept of being the alpha, trying to be a dominant person and humiliating this person in front of a female. But that is just non existent there. One of you guys in the comment section also wrote something out once that the Stein murder is more and more of a mind fudge the longer you look at it. And I agree. I agree. It's more and more confusing because we were also discussing this on one of the Ripper Wednesday episodes, and that relates to how and why Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac would have committed their crimes. With Jack the Ripper, there is a very clear escalation in viciousness, especially if the murder of Martha Tabram actually was committed by Jack the Ripper. That was from the summer of 1888, before the Autumn of Terror, and that's just a case where a woman is stabbed 39 times. Then once you get to the Ripper's crimes, the women are mutilated and disemboweled, and they just get more and more vicious, going all the way to the murder of Mary Kelly, which is perhaps the most vicious murder that has taken place in the last 200 years. With the Zodiac Killer, or things like that? No, the Zodiac is the absolute opposite. If anything, the Zodiac crimes de-escalate. Now, you can debate this, you could explore this in a couple of different ways, but you could say that the Blue Rock Springs shooting was the most vicious crime committed by the Zodiac because, more or less, the victims are just sprayed with bullets, and Mike Mageau, the surviving victim, definitely dealt with a lot more pain and suffering than the victims at any other crime scene. Out of a surviving victim, that is. Again, out of the survivors, or just he has, bullets going through his tongue and his jaw, and he's shot in the knee. Very, very painful. Although Lake Berryessa would be another example of a very vicious crime. Cecilia Shepard was in an enormous amount of pain, and I think that you guys are familiar with all of the details, so I don't want to restate them because it's not like I'm just trying to share some gory and morbid info. It's more about how the victims at the second and third Zodiac crime are attacked viciously, much more so than the first one. But then with the Stein murder, of course that's a less intense crime, a less vicious crime, a less sadistic crime, a less confrontational crime. It's completely different. It's almost as if the confirmed Zodiac crimes reach a type of zenith at the second and third, and then the crimes de-escalate in terms of ferocity. Very, very bizarre. And one person wrote this out in the comment section on Ripper Wednesday saying that might suggest that there were multiple killers. I mean, there's not a consistent escalation of physical violence. But what do you guys think? What do you think about any of the observations about not only the Zodiac, but other serial killers that were discussed in this Serial Killer Talk radio segment? And what do you think about the clues in the Zodiac Killer mystery, and what are your interpretations of the evidence? Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And of course, there is BlackBoxNed88 over on Instagram. And I will see you over there. That's all for me now. Good